Welcome.
Here.
Yay! We're so excited to invite all of these friends and family to come and join us and celebrate this camp. We have run this in person, and then last year it was all virtual. And so it was just such a pleasure to have everyone back in person again this week. I am Amy Schuster. I'm a faculty and staff member in the philosophy department, and I am your MC for session 1. Camp Freedom and Flourishing Collaborative Symposium. Yeah, super exciting. And so what I wanted to do was tell you a little bit about like what this is, what we're doing here today, and why we decided to call this a collaborative symposium. So basically, we've divided all of our campers up into groups, and they're going to give a presentation. But kind of the format of this, I think, is kind of worth pausing upon because we intentionally really made some choices there about how to run this. So we decided to call this a collaborative symposium. And I'm just wondering, does anybody know like where that word symposium comes from and what it originally meant?
Greece.
Comes from Greece. Yeah. It's a drinking party. No, that's not what we're doing. That is not what we're doing. But in ancient Greece, the symposium was a drinking party. But what happens is philosophy comes in and steps on all of that. It ruins it. Thankfully, actually, because we get something better. Plato writes a dialogue called the Symposium. It's a recording, supposedly, of a conversation that this historical guy named Socrates had about love. I mean, what could be better, right? But the basic idea that Plato kind of revises that ancient drinking practice was that people were interested in sharing out their truth and their wisdom with other people and bouncing their ideas off of other people and being responsive and developing their understanding in light of this conversation. And so that was really one of those earliest understandings of what philosophical investigation was all about. And so that's what we want to do here today. Now, what happens when you start mixing argument and drinking is not good, right? And in fact, when you mix argument and philosophy, stuff happens that's not good. And in fact, Socrates even tells us things like this in the Republic. Here's a quote from the Republic. He says, "I don't suppose it's escaped your notice that when young people get their first taste of arguments, they misuse it by treating it as a kind of game of contradiction. They imitate those who refuted them by refuting others themselves, and like puppies, they enjoy dragging and tearing those around them with their arguments." I don't know if your dinner table is like that, but when I was growing up, that was my first taste of what philosophy and argument was all about. So even in ancient Greece, as we're having this kind of philosophical renovation of the symposium, we have this tendency to want to make it about reputation and display and things like that. Now, I think this kind of focus on the young people was a little unjust, and he knew it himself because really shortly thereafter, he says part of the problem is not just young people, it's people in general. And the problem with people in general is that we don't listen sufficiently. It's another quote from Plato. I mean, we don't have to go back more than 2,500 years to find more wisdom. We haven't listened sufficiently to fine and free arguments that search out the truth in every way for the sake of knowledge, but that keep away from the sophistications and heuristic quibbles that both in public trials and in private gatherings aim at nothing except refutation and disputation, right? So his idea is that it's not just young people, it's everyone. Our culture is infused by understanding argument as about this kind of like effort to, heuristic is this concept that is in ancient Greece that we can't really translate very well, but it's a competitive way of trying to exchange reasons rather than a cooperative way of trying to exchange reasons, whereby we're all interested in searching for the truth and we come together because we need help of other people to bounce our ideas off of. And that in the modern era, John Stuart Mill on liberty, great philosopher who offers you that argument for how it is that truth is best searched out in some kind of collaborative arrangement. So that's what we have to do. Socrates holds out that possibility. He says an older person, doesn't have to be an older person, a wise person won't want to take part in such madness, the drinking party. He'll imitate someone who's willing to engage in discussion in order to look for the truth, rather than someone who plays a contradiction for sport. So our desire here in calling this a collaborative symposium is to resist that tendency to try to just refute someone because maybe what they're saying doesn't immediately ring true to what you think is true. And instead, we want to engage in collaboration. So what does collaboration look and feel like? Well, for the audience member, we really want to encourage you to open yourselves up to hearing somebody's perspective that you haven't maybe ever heard before, and ask questions about that aim to understand that position a little bit better. So I really invite you to collaborate as an audience member by asking questions where you're trying to get deeper into where is that idea coming from? Right? And what does that feel like as an audience member as you come away, I think, feeling like you better understand this other person. And maybe you also better understand your resistance to that, or maybe you've decided to change your mind, or maybe you better understand yourself. And then for that presenter, you don't feel like you're just a target. Instead, what you feel like when you're engaging in this collaborative symposium is that you've got this truth that you really want to share out, and you're looking for people who are willing to listen to it with an open heart and open mind. But you also hold those ideas with some humility, right? That we're all just trying to figure it out, and maybe we can actually learn something even as a presenter. So we're hoping that that frame will help you set up what we're hoping this whole session is going to be about. Okay, so with that frame, what I'm going to say is that we've got 4 groups in this session. We'll take a 10-minute break, and then we've got another, I think, 3 groups to present in session 2. Each group's going to have a 5-minute presentation, and then 10 minutes of just discussion of that presentation. And so I'm super excited to share the first group with you. Now, I just want to let you know, for those who are presenting, just so that you're heard by all of our guests in the Zoom, everybody say hi, Zoom.
Hi.
Just so you're heard by all of our guests in the Zoom, if you could make sure to pass the mic. And when we get to the Q&A, it may be that what I need to do is repeat your question into the mic. So I'll probably call on people during the Q&A and repeat the question just so the people in the Zoom can actually hear what people here in the room are actually saying. We learned that from last week, that just didn't translate. So, okay, great. So, where was my first group is group number 5. What makes a desire conducive to flourishing? Yeah, come on up and go ahead and introduce yourself and get your
Hello, I'm Kai. This is Danny. Is this microphone working?
It is.
Okay, good. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Today we will be discussing what makes a desire conducive to flourishing. So, before we can talk about this, we have to sort of talk about what flourishing is. So, in this case, what we mean by flourishing is just leading a good life, living your best life, perhaps. Any desire, if it's met, is conducive to flourishing. So if you have what you want, if you want money and you have money, if you want to be famous and you're famous, it seems that you'd be living a good life and you'd be flourishing. But there's also the question of, that's sort of a subjective standard. Like one person might want to have one thing and another person might want to have another thing. But I guess who are we to judge what's a good desire and what's a bad desire? So perhaps just any desire is a flourishing desire. So a few reasons for this. One, I sort of already mentioned, it's intuitive. Like we just feel like it makes sense, right? If you have what you want, you're living a good life. That just seems kind of obvious. And yeah, I already brought up the sort of who are we to judge, even though it is subjective. Like, they have what they want. They're living their best life. Who are we to judge? So now I'm going to pass it on to Danny to finish the second half of the presentation.
So those arguments for it aren't really the whole story, right? So the arguments against it, one of the biggest things is the sort of malformed desires that are referred to as. These are basically desires that, when fulfilled, will have negative consequences that outweigh any positive benefit gained by fulfilling a desire. So if you think of things, this is like drug addiction, suicide, other destructive actions that you might have a desire to do, you might want to do it, but that's going to come back to hurt you later or hurt society later in some way. It's not like it's totally good to do these, like, it's not good to do these things, but you still want to do them anyway. And then another competing theory against this then would say that there's actually an objective list of things that make people happy. It's called objective list theory. So it's not just subjective based on what each person's desires are. It's just there's the set list of things, that make you happy, and there's no subjectiveness to it. I mean, of course, people can debate about what goes on that list, but it's not up to the individual person, and it gets rid of these kind of malformed desires that seem to, even though you want to do them, don't actually make your life flourish or better in any way. One example of this that we came up with, or we have heard about, is the sort of person who lives in their mom's basement when they're like 30 years old and doesn't really do anything besides just play video games all day, because that's their desire, right? If they desire, they just sit in their mom's basement playing video games because that's what they want to do. That's their desire. But they don't have a job. They don't really contribute to society at all. They don't really do a whole lot, but their desire is met. So are we supposed to say that a life like that is flourishing? I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to just claim that this person right there is actually flourishing, even if his desires are all met. So then this leads to the question of, well, are all desires really good, and are all desires conducive to flourishing, right? The answer to this question is definitely not clear. Our thinking, we basically just came to the conclusion that you have to basically weigh the positive and negative consequences of desires, and that there's no really clear-cut test you can do for, okay, this is a good desire, this is a bad desire, right? You just have to look at it and say, this desire is going to obviously hurt me, this desire is going to help me, or society at large, right? You have to think about these consequences and just go through sort of one by one almost and look, okay, is this good, is this bad? There's no just one way to do it. I think that's a really interesting question to think about, is like, how do you do that, right? What's a positive consequence? What's a negative consequence? These are all important questions. And then also, what do we do with the bad desires, right? Like the desire to do drugs or to do other things that will cause negative effects to you. What do you do with that if you can't do it? Like, does that desire just go unmet? Do you try to remove the desire in some way, right? These are big questions, and it's important to think about these if you want to have a flourishing life under this theory. I think I'd love to hear what the audience has to say on this. So I'll just keep this summary slide up while we take questions from audience members here. Oh,
I'll go first. So you've given us two different accounts here of how we can get a flourishing life. You've given us an outline of desire satisfaction theory and an outline of objective list theory. Which of these two did you two think is the most promising of the two that you presented?
I think our conclusion, of course, Owen asked, which of the desire satisfaction theory versus objective list theory do we believe in more? And I think you would agree with this. We came to the conclusion that objective list theory is overall the better option. I mean, we're not taking like a definitive 100% stance. But I think that about covers it.
Yeah. The one big thing about objective theories are almost always nicer, because it's easy to point out subjective times when someone seems to be objectively wrong. The one big issue with them is figuring out what exactly the objectively correct thing is. So, like, what do you need objectively? What does everyone need to have a good life?
What do you think some of the things on that list should be?
All right, the question was, what do you think some of the things on that list should be? During our discussion at the camp, things were proposed like friends and family and relationships and like material prosperity and comfort were things that were presented. Of course, there's no one definitive list of that. Do you have anything more to?
But sort of,
Very subjective.
yes.
in some sense,
it's very subjective unless you want to go with an objective list theory, in which case there has to be one list that's true for everybody. And that's the problem with objective list theory. Like I earlier we talked about the example of an ascetic who spends all his time in the woods meditating, contemplating life, doesn't have a family, doesn't have a career, but it seems to be leading a relatively flourishing life. So yeah. Yes.
Do you think there could be an objective list there in the sense that every person has a different objective list that would make them have a flourishing life? Does it have to be one list that works for everyone? Or do you think each individual person can have a different objective?
So the question was, does everyone have to have the same objective list, or can individuals have different objective lists? And do you have something to say to that?
Yeah, I was wondering, maybe instead of having like this white list of things that everyone gets to do, maybe we could make a list of all of the things that, are malformed desires and have those on a blacklist so that everything else could be considered. Because I feel like that list might be a little shorter.
So it was proposed that instead of having a list of everything that you do need, you can have a list of everything that you should not do. And if you don't do everything that's on that list, you will have a good life. What do you all think about that? Yes.
My concern with having a bunch of different objective lists for each person is how does that differ from desire satisfaction theory at that point? Because it's your desires to just do what's on the list.
Do you want to address this one?
Yeah, I would. So the question was, what's the difference between everyone having their own objective list versus desire satisfaction theory? And I think basically, I would say at least that no, there is no difference. I mean, that basically, where are you going to get your own objective list from? Your desires, right? I think to me, they would seem functionally the exact same. I think with the question about whether it'd be better to have some sort of blacklist of things that are bad to do, I think that gets into, it's almost as difficult to define all the different things that are bad to do as all the different things that are good to do. Like, I don't really think that solves the problem at all.
So they're both equally difficult, you think?
I would think, yeah. I mean, I haven't tried to create a list of all the bad things, I would say, but it sounds, I mean, to me, that I just don't see why that would be any easier and any simpler than the other way. Yeah.
Would flourishing also be subjective as well? Like, who decides who's flourishing or not? Would it be up to the individual or like the society? Like, to some extent?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, who decides what flourishing is, like the individual versus the society? I think generally the whole point of desire satisfaction theory, I would say, is that it is basically the individual who decides what flourishing is through their desires, right? And that's basically just the individual defining what their own flourishing is. I think objective list theory presents a more societal view of it. There's definitely no like one clear-cut answer to that, though. I mean, it really depends on how the lens you're looking at it through and kind of what you're defining flourishing to be. Anyone want to add to that?
So, like, for the question, sort of, in this case, if you go with desire satisfaction theory, flourishing is having your desires met. That's the definition of flourishing. If you want to go with objective list theory, it's a universal. That's generally what objective means. So, like, there's a universal list somewhere that has like a series of bullet points on it. And your level of flourishing is directly proportional to how many of those bullet points you check off. Yes.
Okay, let's say there's something that's like debated upon in society. For example, like taking drugs, something like weed.
Yeah.
That's something some people believe is a good thing, some people believe is a negative thing. So if somebody's individual desire was to take that drug, would that be seen as like some people as a positive, some people as a negative?
So the question was, if there's something controversial in society, like for example, marijuana, and some people want to take it and some people don't want to take it, would that be seen as a positive or a negative for flourishing? And so the answer to that one sort of depends on which theory you like. If you like desire satisfaction theory, then if you're flourishing, if you want to take it and you take it, and you're also flourishing if you don't want to take it and you don't take it. If you like objective list theory, it just sort of depends on if marijuana is on that objective list of good things you need to do to be flourishing. And you can all argue about that all day if you want, but I'm not going to. Yes, Elizabeth.
I was wondering if you can elaborate on the effect that time and space in picking which one of the two theories. So in other words, oversimplifying, if I am a baby, I have certain desires and needs, right? That will be feeling flourishing. If I am an adult in Japan, I care about different things. So if I'm an adult here, my desires will be different. So can you elaborate on me which, what you think about these two theories apply in different times and space?
Yeah, so the question was, how can we look at these different theories in different places in time and space? So like being in childhood versus being an adult and like different places in the world. I think what I would say to that is for a baby who doesn't really know very much about the world, right? I think it doesn't make very much sense to just go off of the baby's own instinctual desires for what's going to make them flourish. I mean, that's why parents exist, right? Parents have to make sure that your children are getting what's appropriate for them and are not just doing things that are going to hurt their development. I think certainly once you get to like adulthood or later in your adolescence, you become more able to discern what's right and wrong for you. Of course, not perfectly, but more than like a young child would be able to. So I think the importance of not always just listening to your instinctual desires is going to be the biggest when you're at a young age and you don't really know as much about the world. And I think it could definitely diminish as you get older, possibly. I think is how I would look at that. Do you have anything more to add to that?
Maybe a little. So it's possible that there are different objective lists for different ages, but you might also say that when you're looking at a flourishing life, you're not just looking at a specific moment in someone's life and saying, are they flourishing in this moment? You're looking at like the broad picture of the life and saying, overall, in that life, did that person flourish? You had a question?
Sort of. Like with the whole age thing, what would you say is the defining factor, defining age or stage in someone's developmental process of when they can decide what things they need to flourish for themselves instead of their parents deciding? Because, yeah.
Okay, so the question was, at what age can someone determine what is good for their own flourishing? And I think, there's no one specific age. I mean, I don't think anybody, no matter how old they are, is always going to be perfectly capable of knowing what's good for their own flourishing. But again, I think as your brain develops and as you learn more about the world and about the consequences of certain actions, I think you're better able to discern kind of what desires would be good to act on and what desires would be not so good to act on, I think is the general principle there.
Thank you so much. Okay, so our next group is how do gender roles limit or promote flourishing? Or can we attach that?
Would you be able to write on the whiteboard?
Oh, okay, great. Whiteboard.
No drum.
So our presentation is going to start with a skit that we did, and I have two disclaimers I want to make about the skit. So it's going to be a little chaotic, so we're not going to be able to like pass the mic around to every person so they can all be heard, but we do have a like actual written out script if we would be to post that like somewhere after if you wanted to read it. And secondly, that was it? Okay. I feel like, was there something?
Yes. All right. The skit The skit is gonna open with a father returning home from a long day at work and followed by the mother returning at home from a long day at work.
Oh, also, we did not have enough time. We had like literally an hour to put all of this together, so we're gonna be reading lines, like we're gonna be reading from our script. Sorry about that. We're not professionals.
Can you guys start by introducing yourself?
Oh yeah, hi, I'm Corey and this is.
I'm Elijah.
I'm Greg.
I'm the child. Here's a text that's got me.
Okay. Hey, sport.
Mommy! Hey, honey. I miss you. I need to go make dinner. I want Fruit Loops.
Could you guys be quiet?
We don't have Fruit Loops, Corey. I want Fruit Loops. Oh, I want spaghetti. This is for Daddy. This is for your father. Go team! Here's your dinner, honey. And suspicious juice. Where's my Fruit Loops? Here's some eggs for you. I don't like eggs.
Well, but can you shut that kid up?
All right, Corey, come on, let's get it started.
And see.
I take back what I said earlier. That felt very professional to me.
Gender roles limit or promote flourishing.
The first thing might be thinking, what is flourishing? I know they kind of answered that in the last one, but let's think about this. What is flourishing? Living a life full of well-being / a well-lived life.
Well, what's a well-lived life?
What is well-being?
Yeah. Having a good quality of life.
So you might be thinking, what is quality of life? So let's answer that for you.
Yep. We've actually got a very, very good description for that.
Right?
There's no definition. There's no real definition for quality of life, because every time that you try, and especially in philosophy, every time that you try to put a solid definition on something, there is always going to be one person who's just like, okay, but what? No.
Yeah.
So
So there are really two schools of thought. The first school of thought is called hedonism.
Hedonism is basically just all you need to be living a flourishing life, a good quality of life, is to be happy, right?
So happiness, it's fundamental to your life, of course, but is it really all you need? So there's another school of thought called the objective list theory. So you might have seen in the last presentation, objective list theory is basically stating that there are a multitude of reasons as to what makes a flourishing life. So we're gonna see what you guys believe is a flourishing life.
So we'll have you guys just raise your hand and suggest something that you think you need to have a good life. Okay?
health. Health was one. Contentment. Big words. We're using big words. Yes, Cameron.
Fulfillment.
Fulfillment. This is definitely not copied from our actual sessions. These were not. Yes, they were. Amy.
Bodily integrity.
That is a new one. Nice job. Bodily integrity. You.
Lack of regrets.
Lack of regrets. That's. I remember that coming up once in conversation. So basically, just being satisfied with everything that you did in life.
Happiness.
Oh, we got a happiness. We got a happiness in the building, guys. Oh, again, Cameron.
Being alive.
Oh, living. Yeah,
Life is
living.
pretty
I mean, I would say, yeah, you need to be alive to be flourishing. And we'll take Katie to get to the last one.
Authenticity.
Authenticity.
Okay, so in the objective list theory, there's a multitude of things. A lot of these things, a lot of you might not agree with. Some of you might not think you need health to be happy. You might think that you don't really need a lack of regret. Sometimes regrets build you, right? So from here, let's talk about objective list theory, not just to be happy as yourself, but in a relationship. Do any of you guys have anything that you think you need in a relationship to be happy?
Trust.
Trust.
Communication.
Communication.
Respect.
Respect. Love.
Equality.
Equality. That's it. Happiness.
Happiness.
That's not.
Gender. So at the beginning, you saw a skit that featured a mother returning from home and immediately getting all of the responsibilities of a child, cooking dinner, and this is all after just as difficult of a day at work as her husband probably assumably had. So we were questioning that. We were like, wait, so how do gender roles play into everyday life? And what if they, I don't know, just exploring that idea a little bit, because it's interesting how they impact it.
Okay, so I circled some of the things on the board that you guys put out because I want to highlight those. Yeah, love isn't that important in a relationship, obviously, and neither is trust. But I specifically want to highlight these things. Communication. You need to be able to communicate your needs in the relationship, of course, right? With respect, you're able to respect each other in the relationship. And equality. So equality, you need to have a balance in the relationship of what you do. Okay. And as you see, when I came home, father, I was able to immediately go home and relax and chill, right? Got some suspicious juice, got my food, and I was chill. However,
Me, on the other hand, as the woman, I had to get home from a long day of work, and the work had not stopped because mothers are expected to be the ones cooking and caring for the child, getting the child to bed, while the father is expected to get home and relax.
My role was just nuisance.
Yeah. And one of the reasons for the standard is because long time ago, women were not allowed to work. So the men would be doing the work while the women stay at home and do the housework, like cooking and caring for the child. Well, when women were finally able to get jobs, that second standard of doing the housework never went away, and it was never balanced between husband and wife.
so this inequality obviously goes against one of the fundamentals of what a good relationship holds. Do you guys have any questions?
Does it change your analysis at all if the wife in this relationship doesn't have a job like the husband does? Does that play into your thinking at all?
Okay, so he said, if the wife does not have a job, does it change anything in this, I guess we would say, analogy? I think so, yeah. But I guess the issue here isn't when that's a thing, because then that, I guess it kind of be balanced, I suppose. But because it's more present day, you kind of need both people to be working in the household to make up the full family's economy. So I guess it wouldn't really matter in that situation. That's more like an older standard of the traditional housewife or working husband.
Really think people are going to be supported by one job in this economy? In this economy? Yeah, so it's more like plausible that both partners in a relationship would, sorry, we're trying to clean up, we had a lot of problems. So both partners in a relationship would have to be like, money makers, because they do have a child, and that's, we don't know how many children they have. Maybe the other ones are just nice. Maybe I'm the problem.
Any other questions? Okay, yeah.
So I noticed in your skit, and a lot of what you talked about after was mostly focused on family. How does this affect, for example, like a job life? How does that change
Okay, so the question was, outside of family life, how do gender roles affect, equality and stuff? I say with like a work life, often women are expected to put in a lot more of the effort because, I don't know, there's always a standard that men have it easier because typically they're thought of as above women. Right? That has been a standard that's been around for a long time. And,
Oh, me?
It's just such a good question.
Yes, a question from the Zoom. So here's the question. So how might you bring in the dimension of each individual within a partnership and sort of with regard to communicating and attempting to sort of pursue what they want without using traditional gender roles? So how would you, how would each of the roles in the partnership work were you to abandon these gender roles?
Just dispersing the work. I mean, I feel if those people do their equal part, then it should work perfectly. You don't really need one person to be doing everything in a situation like that. If you split it up, I think we can get done better.
So why do you think that people maintain their gender roles even when it's not conducive towards happiness or flourishing or their material needs? Like people will like still subscribe to those gender roles and condition.
So the question was, why do people continue to perpetuate these gender roles, even if they're not very conducive to the household? Truth is, I don't think people realize that they are, or if they are, it's very difficult to get out of it. It's been so ingrained into American society that people don't really have a choice. And when they do, I think that's like the rare relationship where people are able to get around that. But I think in a traditional like straight family household, that's usually how it ends up, especially with like I guess more traditional households. So I don't think it's really a choice thing that people are like, oh yeah, I want to do this. Or if they do, it's usually because of prerequisites, like they've been taught this way as they grew up, or stuff like that. So
a lot of times when there's inequality happening, we don't have a choice in the matter. Like if you're not happy because of inequality, there's not much you can do about it without having other people change themselves first, because we don't ask for inequality. It just happens. Yeah, it just kind of happens.
Thought that there might be value to having sort of these traditional roles, if maybe they aren't necessarily tied to like the male and female individuals. If you have a father who's fulfilling the nurturing role, for instance, do you think there is value in having those roles even if they're not tied to gender?
So the question was, is there any positive aspects about having gender roles? Like, because we've obviously just been talking about the negatives. So is, for example, like a father being the more nurturing partner, like, is that such a bad thing? Is that what you're asking?
I guess just to see like are there positives versus in a family. I guess that's what most of it talking about. Does it make sense for one person to be like more the nurturing role versus the other person, or do you think that that doesn't make sense?
I say that it depends on the relationship between two people, because relationships are.
So use that.
No, I think that's.
No, sorry, for the Zoom audience, the question was, does it make sense for one person to be more of that nurturing role, or should it be equal between both partners?
Yeah, I really think it depends, and that this should be something that should be discussed between partners, like in a relationship, because that is kind of, it's specific to those certain people. But having a kid takes two people. That's kind of like, and if you're going to be in a household where there are two parents, I feel like they really should work together, unless there is a previous agreement of, oh, I'm okay with like both people consent to just having one more nurturing parent.
Yeah, I think you just pulled your whole point together, right? You have the trust, communication, respect, document. If you have that, then together as a family, with the child complete, you can come up with your objective list theory.
For yourself, yeah, for your family.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Basically what he just said was that, we tied our points together, because with all of these things, or just with an objective list in your family, you can, build on that with how you want to raise your family, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So group 3 is arbitrary power and the relationship between equality and freedom. As you can tell, we don't do it easy here.
It's quite pushing.
Okay. All right, I'm Micah, this is Farah, and we're going to see the relationship between equality and freedom. Do we need to have, basically the question is, do we need to have freedom to have equality in society, and like in a large group setting? Think of it as like a workplace or a country, a large group setting. Do we need to have freedom to have equality? And we need to answer a couple questions to break this question down. First one is, what makes an individual free, right? So a theory that we liked and we basically came up with down here is that the ability to make a choice with multiple options, nothing significantly weighing on those options, make it an individual free. We have a couple examples for this. First example of where someone is not free is when you're choosing between working after high school and going to college. So if you are a poor person, this decision will be a little different for you. So choosing college will put you to a significantly more debt and strife than if you got a job, right? The financial burden significantly weighing on your decision. So in this case, you would not be free. And we have a second example that addresses the other part of our definition. This relates more to the fact that you can't be free without choices. And the example is when someone is being robbed at gunpoint. So your only option here, unless you consider death an option, is to give up any valuables the robber desires. So therefore, you are not free. And as I brought up earlier, some people may argue that you are free because you can choose death, but we personally don't agree with that because, if you look at suicide, we don't believe in people being able to commit suicide. So the same principle basically applies here. And Farah is going to talk about equality.
What makes an equal society? Well, an equal society is one without arbitrary power. And then what is arbitrary power? Well, I would say a power over another that's unchecked. And an example of arbitrary power is slavery. African Americans were taken without their consent and were forced to do hard work labor. And they weren't able to get themselves out of their predicament because of their predicament. How are equality and freedom related? You cannot have a free society if there isn't equality. To have equality means everyone is equal. Therefore, not everyone is free since there is no equality. W.E.B. Du Bois says, and I quote, "I not only met plenty of persons equal in ability to myself, but often with greater ability and nearly with always greater opportunity." Meaning that often in the world, certain people have more opportunity, meaning society isn't free.
All right, so that's basically our presentation. Any questions regarding what we brought up?
Is there a way to make a society equal without limiting the freedom of members of that society?
That's a good question. The question he's brought up is basically, can we make society equal without limiting the freedom of people in that society? And it basically ties back to what we said. I believe we can. If you're looking at society in like a large group setting, if you're talking about a small group, maybe like a family, Yeah, maybe a family needs to function by having arbitrary power, let's say over a 2-year-old. But if we're talking about, let's say in a workplace or in a country, a certain demographic can have arbitrary power over another for like that society to be free, for everyone, that society to be free. So yeah, no, I don't think that for society to be free, people's freedom needs to be limited in any capacity.
So for that college example you gave earlier, like you choose to go to college, you choose to work after high school, right? Don't you think even though there may be a like option persuading you to choose another option, you still have the choice? I mean, isn't that kind of negative and positive freedom? Like I feel like you could make a hard decision, like, okay, I go to college, I'll be in debt, but if I graduate, go to med school, maybe get a great job that can pay off my debt, or because of the price of the price of college, making you want to work in high school, you can choose to do high school. So I feel like in that situation, although there's a factor, you can kind of choose both.
The question was, he was bringing out, going back to the example we had, where someone chose between college and having a job. And he's saying that there's basically a positive, effect from going to college in the long term, and it would be better than getting a job. As you maybe go to medical school, and that'll be better in the long term, even with the financial burden. My counter to that is, if you have so much debt accrued when you take on the burden of college, it doesn't really provide you with the same amount of opportunities if you had zero debt, like let's say getting a job, right? So even if, let's say you get more opportunities by getting through college, that debt still lingers, and that, initial strife you face is going to be hard to shed. And there's a lot weighing on you if you make that. So I think the long term is going to be affected by the short term decision. That makes sense.
Yeah, so do you think there's a way that we can maximize freedom, like choices that we can make, while minimizing the amount of coercion, like we have to sacrifice in order to go? Is there a way we can accomplish that in our society?
So his question was, can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yeah. So we can maximize like an individual's the amount of choices that they can make while minimizing what they have to do. So sacrificing what you have to do for you achieve some better balance in our society today.
So basically his question was, can we achieve better balance between what we have to do and what we need to do? That's basically what I'm getting. So I think a good way of doing that, balancing what we need to do and have to do, is basically having, so let's say, I'm gonna approach this the way. I think there's some things we need to do, obviously. You need to clean the toilets, right? Let me think of that as an example. Someone needs to take care of a sewer system. There's always gonna be hard labor that no one wants to do, but it has to be done. I think if we can incentivize people to do that hard work better than we do now, because I think now when you think of a toilet cleaner, you think of someone who has no power over their own labor, like is paid bad, doesn't really have a lot of benefits. But I think if we provide those things, those benefits that, when you don't think of a janitor, they don't have now, I think that'll incentivize people to take that job and, do things that we need to do and flourish beyond that. And that, yeah, basically.
So the question I have follows, your comment about college debt and money. So do you think that wealthy people have more freedom? I mean, it'd be good to hear both of you.
Can you repeat that one more time?
I was wondering if wealth makes a difference and gives you more freedom.
Okay, so his question was, if you're more wealthy, does that affect your freedom towards like going to college? Well, I would say yes, you do have more freedom. because you typically will have the money to pay for it, considering poor people who can't afford it. College is like $50,000. Not everybody has that laying around. So yes, I do think that wealthy people have more freedom. Any other questions? Yes?
So going back to later in your presentation, you said that in order for society to be free, it needs to be equal. So like, do the wealthy people need to have their money taken away in order to make society more equal?
Well, that's a hard one. Well, his question was, for a society, I said that we all need to be equal. And he said that do the wealthy people need their money taken away? And I would say, this is really a hard one.
I can address this better. I think the answer, just take their money away. I think you need to, it would be better if you thought about it, not in just that, basic way of saying it, basically, like just not taking their money away. I think there's ways we can limit the amount of money and exponential growth their wealth gains, because when you think of wealthy people, you think of their wealth growing exponentially, and like thinking about Elon Musk, like his money grows in billions, like normal people's money grow in thousands, right? So I think if we limit the ways that they can gain wealth and make that equal amongst everyone, I think that would help and balance things out a little bit.
There are colleges, small colleges here in the States, where things are equal because everybody has to work to be able to go to the classes. So that no matter what your family income is, you still have to be the waiter in the lunchroom for a semester, or you still have to be the person who goes and sweeps the parking lot for a semester while you're going to school, because you can't buy your way out of those things. So you think that would help change a generation if we could adapt to that more?
So what she's saying is, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. Well, when I started college, I could not get a college scholarship because guess what? I'm a girl. And they did not give. You couldn't go to the bank and get a loan to go to college if you were a girl, because girls didn't count. So we have come a ways, but not on that. But what I'm saying is we can't make it equal by giving up all the money, rich people, but you could make it equal by not being able to use it for a length of time, so the 4 years you're in college. Do you think that a 4-year college experience like that would transition between the leftovers of my generation and then your generation and make it, a dramatic step, or do you think that just be?
Okay, the question was, if we limit the amount of spending people do in their 4 years college experience, is that where I was getting?
Yeah, but you're not allowed to spend. You're not allowed to buy.
You're not allowed to spend anything in your 4-year college experience. Will that improve the way young people treat spending and improve the wealth gap? My response to that is, I think the problem is not necessarily within the mindset of our generation. I think you're talking about our generation, the financial struggles we face. I think the problem is probably more at a systemic level. I think the reason why there's so much of a wealth gap between the rich and the poor, because there's, again, as I said, there's a system that benefits them. Again, like I said, billion people, wealthy people monies go up in billions, like, poor people will go up in thousands. So I don't know if the mindset change would necessarily do much. I think there's definitely a disadvantage people are facing at the systemic level. So I don't necessarily agree with that, but I don't know. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, right, so we're gonna take our fourth group now, and then we'll take a break. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So our fourth group is, oh, sorry, our last group is group 7, technically. It's called The Trial of Tiny Tim the Fourth. I'm Emma. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Haley, but I'm a camp counselor. I'm just helping.
So we said our title is The Trial of Tiny Tim IV, but the kind of area that we're addressing is different perspectives on if you should have moral responsibility or not. That's Tiny Tim, by the way.
Put him on the podium. Oh. Yeah, there you go.
Order in the court. Court is now in session. In the trial of Tiny Tim IV for mass murder, please restate your cases on the previous testimony.
People of the jury. This man has committed a grave offense via his own doing. Based on the libertarian viewpoint, which I hold, not politics. Tiny Tim IV had full control over his decision to commit mass murder, and should be held fully accountable for the repercussions. Have the record show we are now viewing footage of the event. Please play evidence number 37. Yeah, based on the evidence shown, the action of mass murder was unprovoked and therefore taken on his own accord. For this heinous crime, I propose he receive the highest form of punishment, execution via crab pit. Objection, relevancy. Due to the fixed state of the world, my client is at the mercy of hard determinism and does not have control over his actions because they were already predetermined. He did not choose to commit mass murder of his own free will and therefore cannot be punished. It was foretold that these events would take place. Have the record show that the state of the world has not yet been determined, and although both arguments provide valid points, neither argument can be declared as the true state of the world. People of the jury, please take what you have heard here today and deliberate on the decision of the fate of Tiny Tim IV. And
Do a little bit like that.
so the question was, could you go a little more in depth about what you mean by hard determinism? Hard determinism is basically the belief that when it comes to free will, we don't have any because every action has already been predetermined. And so we don't choose to make our actions. They were just already going to happen. And so that viewpoint believes that moral responsibility isn't applicable because you can't be morally responsible for something that you didn't cause by your own choice.
What is being libertarian?
Yeah, libertarian, we often see it in the political world, but in philosophy, it's a theory on free will saying that we have complete control over our lives and we have free will on any decision, therefore we should be held accountable for all of our actions.
What do you think the ramifications would be if the theory that you were advocating about hard determinism was actually how, like, our world saw responsibility? That sounds pretty bad. What would the ramifications be?
The question was, what would the ramifications be
if we saw the world in a hard determinist perspective. Kind of how I see it is, I mean, it's really demoralizing because it's saying that no matter what you do, it doesn't matter because it's already been predetermined. So in this case, the ramifications would be no punishment because it's saying that he really didn't choose the action on his own accord. That so he wouldn't get the crab pit, unfortunately.
It is interesting though, like even though he didn't with the hard determination, he didn't technically choose to do it. So where are the families that were massacred by a rabbit? Where are they going to get any closure? Where are they going to get like how what kind of who's going to get punished? Like I feel like for a murder, somebody get punished, right?
That's a good question. The question was, well, if we're using the hard determinist point of view, then who is going to get punished? How are the families of the murdered men by the rabbit going to get any closure? The thing is that punishment wouldn't make any sense because if we're going with the theory that they just can't cause it of their own free will because it just happens, it wouldn't make sense. But I guess you could also say, like if you think about prisons wouldn't be for punishment, but they would be maybe for just like separation from society, perhaps. Because it's possible that like if an individual did this, then maybe they are supposed to be like a danger to society, so you can put them away or something. So I guess that could be the closure. But also in this kind of point of view, it's hard to know what actually is going to happen.
If hard determinism is true, does human life have any value over and above, say, that of a rock? Because our actions are just as preordained as rock are.
Kai's question is, with hard determinism, is there really any meaning in life? Well, that's really up to how you look at it, because we need to believe in a way that our life has meaning in order to keep living. Like if you just woke up and you understood that nothing really matters, obviously you wouldn't want to keep on living. So you really have to separate that and what it takes to do day by day living and like give your life meaning in some other way. Jesse has a question.
So a question from Zoom says, according to hard determinism, I think individuals can't take responsibility for their actions. Is it possible to hold society perhaps responsible for the individual's actions?
The question was from the Zoom audience, if we can hold society responsible for an individual's actions, and the hard determinist case, if it's not the individual's responsibility. I personally would say no, because no matter what society is, it was already predetermined anyway in the hard determinist view, so it wouldn't matter really what the views of society are for an individual to act.
So, as I recall, in the events I showed you, you cut away before a hard deterministic choice was made to blow him up with a holy hand. Or in this case, if we decided maybe he's not morally responsible, but ethically or from a society standpoint, we're going to, and it could be deterministic or libertarian, but he's going to crash. What's the difference? Like if the outcome is basically, like we can't say, oh, you're not responsible for that to get away with murder. We would have to respond to that. Does that change with whether it's deterministic or libertarian?
Yeah, so the question was how like society's response or how the response to like a murder, like a heinous act committed would be different depending on like the libertarian or the hard deterministic like societal like standpoint, I suppose. For libertarian, they would believe that it is like definitely the person's fault, so they would probably subject them to the crab pit. But for hard deterministic, if society believes in that, then they would go about saying that, oh, the person had no choice because it was already predetermined. So yes, it might be like ethically, like that's a question that you're like, well, what are you supposed to do now? But like in general, they wouldn't think it would be fair to subject a person to the crab pit because they would say, well, they don't have responsibility of the actions because they were just supposed to.
But would we have to determine, like, there's a response, right? Like, you know, what about the families of those poor knights, right? They're because babies. Like, wouldn't there be a response to that would be preordained, right?
That is a very good point, actually, because whatever the response would be, it probably also be predetermined. That one's a bit of a toughie. With hard determinism, they see it like with the facts that this was predetermined, and while they may have certain moral views about it, what they believe is that this was meant to be, so they can reserve their own moral opinions on it. Obviously, if mass murder is not ethical, we don't support that here in society. That's where you get to like prison and punishment, because they would see prison as a way of separating them, like Emma said earlier, which would most likely be the response, but they wouldn't be for the view of crab pit, because they don't see them as fully responsible. So they would take efforts to separate them so that in hopes of preventing it, although that doesn't agree with the hard deterministic perspective. So that's where it really gets into kind of a paradox in a way.
So what about like if everything's predetermined, but the person who was committing that act didn't know that it was predetermined, or money in this case, sorry, but so would in that case, because Bunny did choose to do to defend itself, would that be punishable even if it was supposed to happen, but Bunny still actively made that choice?
So Corey's question was, if Tiny Tim, the fourth here, decided to do that on his own accord, would that be punishable? And yes, that would be punishable because that's for the libertarian view that he did have the free decision provoked to brutally murder those knights, then he would be held accountable for his actions.
Do you think there's an extent to which we don't hold certain individuals responsible for their actions if at a societal level we don't feel they had free will, like children or people who we as a society saw that they were under coercion?
So the question was, in society, are there times at which we don't hold people responsible for their actions, for examples like coercion? With that one, I mean, for the example of children, like you said, children don't have the capabilities of logic and reasoning that you would say an older person, like an adult or a teenager, has. So at that point, you would hold them at less responsibility because they might not know the full repercussions of their actions. Thank you so much. We're going to take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for our last 3 presentations.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Stephen Brown. I'm also a faculty member here at the Ohio State University Philosophy Department. So we're going to have 3 more sessions. We're going to try to keep it moving relatively quickly. We will get you out here by 4.
Right, next up is our Confucianism Taoism group.
Hi, I'm Durga.
And I'm Cameron. We are going to be presenting on.
All right, so we're presenting on the overlap between Confucianism and Taoism.
All right. So Confucianism was made by the Chinese philosopher Confucius, as you can see right there in his prime age. And he believed in rituals were very important to life. We all have rituals in our lives. Some of them are like waking up and brushing our teeth in the morning. That is a ritual. We do it every single morning, and it helps to train us good habits, which is one of the things that he argues is that they help us to build good habits. And he also argues that they help us to express feelings that we can't otherwise. Like funerals. If someone dies, there's nothing you can do about that. And so you need a way to grapple with those emotions. And we use funerals, which is a ritual, to help express our sadness.
An opposing viewpoint is Taoism. In Taoism, the word Tao represents the way of things or the course/path. One of the followers of Taoism, called Zhuangzi, rejects the idea of rituals in Confucianism, and he believes in the idea of wu wei, meaning acting without effort and going with the flow.
So both of these philosophical thoughts are pretty contradictory towards each other and are oftentimes seen as opposites. Well, some of the ideas of Confucianism is that willpower is not enough to change your habits, because these rituals can also lead to poor habits, like smokers have a habit of smoking. And he thinks that willpower is not enough to just suddenly quit smoking one day. You need to have rituals to help build your way up to breaking bad habits and building up good habits. He also thinks that we won't be able to teach ourselves to do the right things without these rituals, and that rituals will give us more freedom overall. For example, the ritual of saying please and thank you adds to our charisma and can allow us to get more things out of other people. My mom was doing something funny, but it lets us, it can increase our charisma, thus allowing us to get more things from other people. If we say, please, can I have that item, there may be a higher chance of us getting that item, which he argues will increase our freedom.
So the opposing viewpoint of Taoism, the way it views rituals, is that rituals restrict people from complete freedom because they establish a base for social conduct upon rituals. So you're not free to fully carry out your desires because there are certain rituals in order to do them, which will restrict your freedom. So Taoism says that it's better to perform actions without putting forth effort, and it is not the way of people to be ritualized. However, Confucianism and Taoism, traditionally opposing viewpoints, may not oppose each other so much, because in order to perform your actions effortlessly in the eyes of Taoism, you must train yourself with rituals from Confucianism.
So there was another Chinese philosopher named, I forgot his name, Zhuangzi, who came up with this story of the ox. So there was an ox butcher, and right at the start of when he was butchering this ox, he was not very good at it. Every time he tried to do it, he would chip his blade, and every few months he would have to replace it. And because of this, he thought of rituals and practicing this cutting in order to make him really good at it. And eventually, as years went on, he became so good at this that he could come in and essentially, without even looking at it, just slice and dice this ox into a bunch of different cuts of meat. And he was so good, and he was going with the flow, didn't even need to think about it. It was effortlessly how well he could cut the ox. And his blade would move in between the ligaments, almost like Taoism is saying, going with the flow.
Essentially, the story was created with the idea of Taoism in mind, where eventually, as time goes by, the ox cutter gets the flow of cutting the ox. So when he's cutting the ox, he can act without effort, which is the idea of wu wei. However, we believe the reason he became better at cutting the ox as time went by, and he got the flow of cutting the ox in the story, is because he went through the ritual of cutting the ox over and over as time went by. So the idea of rituals in Confucianism is what led to the flow of wu wei and Taoism.
So now we're going to open this up to open discussion. Does anyone have any questions on this idea?
What do you think about people with talent, meaning that they don't need to be trained, they are natural?
So you're speaking like about natural talent, people who are
Right,
born
and
with
so
it?
they don't need rituals to be trained, right? And so they can be Taoist from start.
Okay, so the question was, what about people with natural talent or people who just have a talent? So I guess then they would go along with Taoism, but if you're speaking about a particular action, I believe that no one is born with a specific an ability to perform a complicated action. So they would have to perform some kind of ritual to be able to perform that task over and over again with efficiency.
Kind of like going off the shoot, like what she was saying, if you were, for example, really good at raking leaves, it may not necessarily be that you were always good at raking leaves. Like no one's born and right out of the womb, they can just rake a whole yard of leaves. Obviously, there may have been actions that happened throughout their lives or other rituals that led to them just on the side happening to also have really good muscles and are really like leaves for some reason. And because of that, they turn out to be really good at raking leaves.
So you're saying that like things such as practicing motor skills and stuff like that will lead to flourishing and like we're using that word too much to succeeding in like other talents. So if you practice, like you said, getting better muscles, then that will lead to you being better at moves. Is that what you're implying?
So the question was,
so like if you're not directly practicing the specific thing, it can still get you to be better at it.
I think so. The question is, if you, I understand the question, but I'm trying to word it shortly.
So I think what you're trying to say is the practice of doing one skill help do the other one? Is that what you're asking?
Basically.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is practicing one ritual may help you practice other rituals. So for example, conditioning your muscles, like working out your arms, that's a ritual, like doing it, say, every Wednesday or something like that, can help you rake leaves better because that requires muscle strength. So one ritual can help you perform another ritual better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, like it's not what you're implying, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
We both have examples of how a ritual can lead into a state of flow. Can you give us examples where a ritual actually obstruct you from getting to a state of flow?
Maybe if you're dependent on a ritual, for example, I'm going to state the most obvious one, drug abuse. So if you were to, say, abuse a drug, that would stop you from the flow of life overall, per se. So that's an example.
I think maybe what she's trying to say is that like the ritual, because like with the ox example, the ritual ended up with the way. Well, I think what she's trying to say is, how you answered was saying that the ritual can stop you from finding another way, but not in the same thing. So like taking drugs, like for them smoking every day, eventually get to the point where it's not that you're thinking about, I'm gonna go outside and smoke because it feels good. You just go outside and smoke. So like, yeah.
So what's the question again, sir?
I guess like, what, can you think of an example that's more like that? Where it's like,
we think of a positive ritual, like ritual that might be killed, like the teeth brushing, for example, or some kind of positive ritual that might lead you to be too rigid.
Yeah.
And not be able to get into a state of flow. There's times when maybe foregoing the ritual and that flow actually is the best primary method of attacking a thing you're trying to do.
So a positive example could be scheduling. So if you are unflexible, overly unflexible, in the overall flow of life, there will be obstructions to your schedule. And if you're someone who's intent on scheduling, scheduling is something like a really important ritual to you. It may be difficult for you to move away from that schedule. So that may be something that makes it really rigid.
I just wanted to repeat the question so that the Zoom people, the question was, is there ever a scenario, or can you come up with an example of how practicing a ritual can lead to making it harder to get into that state of flow? Are there any other questions from the crowd?
So from a cultural standpoint, I think our society is moving away from more communal ritual, church or like saying the pledge, or like we're very low ritual in the United States. did you look at other countries and like that are higher in the ritual area? And like, does that add to your like peaceful community? Or did you only think, or have you guys only just thought about it from an individual standpoint?
So the question is that he's first stated by saying that in America, we don't have that as many rituals as other countries. And then he asked us, have we looked at other countries to see how rituals affect other aspects that may be more desirable, like peacefulness or better qualities of life, or have we just looked at it on an individual basis? We've more looked at it at an individual basis, but it can definitely be transferred. You can like look at this at a more societal. But I do want to look at one point that you said when you said that America doesn't have that many rituals. I would actually like to argue against that. I think almost everything that we do is a ritual. Like even just coming up here, we started by saying our names. That is a ritual. We did the ritual of just discussing, introducing yourself to the crowd so everyone knows who you are. My hand motions, this is a ritual. Every people of different cultures have different hand motions that they use when they're speaking. Some cultures don't even move their hands at all. That is another ritual that we have to help express our point. So I think it may not look like on the surface that we have rituals, and we're definitely moving away from a lot of rituals, like the Pledge of Allegiance, for example. However, I think there are a lot of unseen rituals that people don't think about, just very subtle, automatic things that are in the subconscious that we don't.
Was that flow?
That could be an example of flow, because I didn't even notice that I was moving my hands until I just said it just now. I was kind of going into the flow of this presentation, where I was just in the flow. I wasn't even noticing that I was moving my hands until I said it.
Yeah. Back to what he said about us studying big group rituals or rituals from other countries. We did actually. We watched a video about 2,500th birthday of Confucius, and there was a ritual in China. So, and right after we finished the video, I thought, do we do anything like that in America? First thing, no, and I couldn't think of anything. And then right after that, we watched a video of the Memorial Day parade or something like that, and it looked different, but deep down it's the same. We're doing the same ritual.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say it wasn't much of a question. He was just for the Zoom. He was making this statement that in class we did actually look at a few world examples or more large group examples instead of individual examples. And he was talking about in China they have a celebration celebrating Confucius's birthday every single year. They hold a whole celebration. And in America we celebrate Memorial Day every single year.
I just want to add on to that. And oftentimes when we look at rituals from other cultures that are not our own, it seems as though it seems different, seems almost exotic, but it's really in their culture, it's normal to them as certain rituals are not normal to us, like lighting fireworks on the 4th of July. That's normal for us. And in their culture, whatever they're viewing is normal for them. So yeah, that's just normal.
All right, thank you. One more here. We're going to quickly change the way this display is used because we need some special effects.
I don't want to spoil it because it's the main event. I'm Ali.
I'm Nico. I'm Finita.
We have, like I said, the main event for you today.
Disclaimer, these are just roles, stuff we do and say, believe in the roles are not necessarily real, just so everybody knows that. But all right, to the main event. Also, one more thing, we're using our phones because we...
Yeah.
We're reading,
yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for the debate of the century? Is there a conflict between religion and philosophy? We'll very soon see. First, in the left corner, Islamic 11th century philosopher, believer in God and the lack of free will, the beast from the Middle East. Make some noise for Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And next, on the right corner, the most prominent philosopher of the 20th century, a true believer in free will, the craziest atheist, Jean-Paul Sartre. Come here, gentlemen. You know the rules. I want a clean argument. Touch gloves, shake hands. Okay. Round one. Do we have free will? Debate.
Obviously, we have free will. Hey, look at this. I just moved my hand. Did some god do that for me? No, of course not. You know why? Because there's no god that's controlling my every action. I'm doing it on my own free will.
Well, obviously, you're wrong. The very existence of God refutes your argument. A wise man once said, if God foreknew that Adam was going to sin, necessarily Adam was going to sin. So Adam did not sin of his own free will. God is omniscient, so there's no free will.
Look, I'm a libertarian. I'm going to die on that rock. But let me, not politically, but but listen, I believe that I can control my own actions, all right? Not that there's somebody making my decisions all for me. Not everything is predetermined, and you need to realize that.
Have you ever heard of determinism? God exists, and he knows everything, so every action is planned. There's no means to life other than the one that God has set out for us.
Look, you know what? I'm going to give you that. I kind of agree with you on that, that there is really no meaning to life. But that's the point of that. The whole point is to make our own meaning, all right? Just because God's omniscient doesn't mean we should just sit down, do whatever we want, and not give a single care about our lives. There's still stuff we need to do, stuff we need to care about. The only way we can actually come to know about the world is if we experience it for ourselves, all right? Look, when I go out into the real world, I experience my own actions. I experience my own choices and decisions. I experience my own freedom. Why? Because I'm free.
We're done.
That's the end of round one. And he hit him with the 1-2 Aristotle. I haven't seen that move since 300 BC. All right. After round one, Sartre here says we obviously do have free will. And El-Ghazali says we do not because of the omnipresence of God. Now, this leads into the question of round two. What role does God have in the debate of free will? Go.
My turn off? Okay, well, let's think about it this way, right? There's obviously free will, right? Because you guys all know God. He's this omniscient, powerful being who makes all of our decisions for us, right? That can't possibly be true, all right? I feel that we actually can make our own decisions for ourselves, all right?
Well, God has to exist. Who else created the universe? The idea of a beginningless universe is absurd. Someone or something must have created the universe, and that someone is God. And his very existence refutes your free will argument completely. If he knows the past, present, and the future, since he is omniscient, there's only one path of events that can happen, the path of events that he knows.
All right, stop saying that. There's no actual evidence that God exists, okay? Tell me you've met God once. Have you? I doubt you actually have. You know why? Because he's not real. Maimonides once even said himself, right, that anything you actually claim to know about God is an insult to him because it's just an assumption. You don't actually know anything about God. It's all good. No, yeah, it's true. You know literally nothing, all right? How do you know there wasn't some big explosion that created the universe? I don't know, like a Big Bang or something, right? There is no evidence that God created your universe.
Well, who caused your big explosion? God. He knows everything that will ever happen. There are no other actions that can occur other than the ones he knows. If your actions have been made since before you were born, there's nothing that you can do. There's no way to make them different. Do you really have free will?
Look, there's no third party controlling every single action I make. And if I'm fully being honest, your theory of God doesn't make 100% sense. Yeah, here's a good example. Could God create a stone so heavy he could not lift it for this all-powerful being? Is that possible? Something above his level, making limits for himself?
Well, yes, I think he could make a rock that is heavy enough, that's too heavy for him to lift. And he could become more powerful after making that rock and then lift the rock. So your argument sucks.
My argument sucks. Okay,
done. And ding ding. After 2 rounds, we saw the ever adamant Al-Ghazali here fighting for the existence of God and the lack of free will for us humans. The French Sartre here argues that we all have free will and that God does not exist. And now, judges, you of the audience get to decide the outcome of the fight. Who won? Who made more sense? Who do you agree with? Who do you disagree with? Anything? Go.
Most importantly, any question?
Yes, in the back.
I'm a little confused because, but by the way, both of you were so brilliant. Great job.
Both of us?
I'm a little confused. It seems like two totally separate issues that are defined here. But like theism and determinism seem pretty separate to me since they're determinate atheists and indeterminate theists as well as the other. So like how do your characters maybe feel about that, since both characters seem to like base a lot of their determinism or indeterminism on their theism, which seems strange to me.
Well, okay, so here's the argument, right?
Question.
So the question was, these kind of seem like two completely different arguments, adding theism and determinism into one thing, right? So here's kind of how the debate went. Al-Ghazali, he's a big true believer in God, and Sartre believes God never played a role in anything. He's an atheist, right? So Sartre is a libertarian. He believes he has free will. But Al-Ghazali, he believes in God. He believes God is omnipotent, omnipresent, omnitemporal, omniscient, basically the omni God, right? He knows everything and everything's already been decided for us. There's no actual free will. So the debate is, do we have free will, which, Sartre believes because he doesn't believe in God? Or do we not have free will and is everything decided for us, which is what Al-Ghazali believes in? So the theism, the atheism collide because they both lead into the said person's, thoughts on free will. The atheism leads onto his thoughts of libertarianism, and the theism leads onto his thoughts on determinism.
Connor, if God exists outside of time, how can he be said to know our actions before we make them?
Well, that's part of the whole debate, right? That's one of the reasons why Sartre doesn't believe in God. And that's one of the things Al-Ghazali says. We don't know everything about God, but we still believe it because who else would have created the universe?
Amy. Okay.
So I think I'm convinced by Al-Ghazali's argument, but I wanted to ask you a question, Al-Ghazali. So if God is omnipotent, is he strong enough to make humans have free will? And if he is, why didn't he make that happen?
So, okay, I'm not really sure about that one.
Okay.
I think overall that's one of the reasons that's kind of leading to Sartre's debate, that you actually can't claim to know anything about God. You've never met him. Everything we know about him is nothing because we don't know anything about him. So Sartre's debate is, okay, we might not, Al-Ghazali's debate is, okay, we might not know everything about him, but who else could have created the universe? Who else could have made all of this? Maybe he has some grand plan. At the end of time, we'll all have free will, and we'll be able to make our own decisions, right? But Sartre's like, oh, why would he do that if he's this all-powerful being? That makes no sense. You know nothing about him. So the two are that's kind of why the two arguments conflict.
Also, I have an idea. So what if he could give people free will, but he doesn't want to? That's an
Right,
idea.
yeah, my question is why?
Well, he's God. I guess he decides to do whatever he wants to do. That's a good answer.
I think that we all try to take free will, but somehow the society and the fear of God, kind of controls our attempt to go free. Is the way I look at both the sides.
Good point. We're gonna go heavy first. No. Okay, yeah, the audience.
But so I have kind of a thought experiment. So like police officers, for example, have authority that's given to them by the power resides in the state, right? And they are given authority under that. It's a delegation of power. And the police officer is supposed to do the will of the state, right? but they do that under their own free will. And sometimes they make terrible choices, and good choice, the whole spectrum of choices within that. But it's a delegated authority. Would that fit into both of these ideas? Deterministic in that I've delegated this power, I've given this role, and then the freedom to act however you will with that delegated authority.
So that could fall into our third theory of philosophy, which is compatibilism, which no one has gone into today. And honestly, I don't really understand it much, but it's the belief that life is already predetermined, but yet you still have the free will to, I don't know, philosopher, help me out. Yeah, okay.
So compatibilism is kind of a mix between determinism and libertarianism in a way, basically thinking there can be several different outcomes, but one is always chosen that can be made from several different ways. So like, let's say I was asked to leave the room because I said something inappropriate. I could either choose to leave the room on my own accord because they told me to, or I could stay and force them to leave me out. At the end of the day, the option is I still leave, but it's different how I left. And so your thing with the police officer, right? It's kind of saying it doesn't really fall under his debate, because his debate is that, okay, so God knows he's going to make this bad decision, and God knows he got this job, so he thinks he has control. We call it the illusion of control and the illusion of free will. You might think you have free will, and it might seem like you have free will, but you don't actually necessarily have free will. So according to Al-Ghazali's debate, we didn't choose to do this project. God knew we were going to do this project. God knew from the very beginning of time, before we were born, before Washington was born, before any of them were born, that before even Al-Ghazali was born, that we were going to do this project at this point in time, this exact point in time. But we think we chose to do this project. We think, oh, hey, we wrote this script, we did this on our own. That's what Sartre's debate is.
So that's what I think. Follow-up question. So is God just?
You want to say something?
You're just bringing up the whole other problem with theology, which is the problem of evil.
Okay, so define just here.
Mr. Brown, depends on what you mean by.
All right, good enough.
I didn't take your class.
No, that's great. Let's go. Let's wrap it up. Coming up this evening, afternoon, whatever time it is. We only have about 10 minutes left, but I just want to quickly comment on a couple of things. So, first of all, thank you for showing up today and for supporting the camp. We really do believe that philosophy is important, and I just want to take a couple moments to give a little pitch for philosophy, because if you're not used to doing it, it's kind of strange, right? You may have noticed that for every single presentation that came up here today, there were always a couple of different views in the air, right? And if you push people, it becomes kind of unclear exactly which one is true, right? So you might think, well, aren't you just wasting your time? You go over to the science department and we're trying to figure out, like how many planets are there, and there might be some dispute, but at the end of the day, there's one answer we're trying to get to, and that's not really what we're doing in philosophy. So what are we doing? One of the ways I like to articulate this is that philosophical progress doesn't look like consensus where we all come to the same agreement. Philosophical progress looks like depth, right? So being able to understand what the different views are and how they relate to each other and the many different implications of the different views is really what we're trying to do. And hopefully you saw that in a number of entertaining ways today as the students struggled to do this, because it is extremely difficult to do. And it's we've all been very proud of them in their attempts to do this really for the first time, and certainly in front of people. So good job, everybody. We're going to wrap things up. We have some certificates to give you, but if you can keep an eye on your email over the next couple of weeks or so, we're going to send out some questionnaires about feedback. We're going to be doing this every year again. We'll change the theme every year. So this year's theme was freedom and flourishing. We haven't picked next year's theme yet. But those of you who are still qualified to come here, which would be if you're not going to university next year, then you will be. Then we'd love to see you back again. Yeah.